Have you ever found yourself wondering why your family is so toxic? Why does your mother's love suffocate you instead of warming you? Why do you always feel on guard, always guilty, always incomplete when you are with her? Maybe this is not just a family issue. Maybe this is the deepest breaking point of your destiny. And maybe this is not a curse, but the beginning of an awakening. Because sometimes a woman is not born to be strong, she is forced to be strong. As Carl Jung said, enlightenment comes not by imagining the light, but by making the darkness conscious. And for many strong women, that darkness starts with the mother. Your mother may not have been able to love you, to see you for who you are, to support you, but maybe by suppressing you, she unintentionally forced you to be strong inside. The place where a toxic mother breaks you is actually where you begin to rebuild yourself. While she silenced you, you learned to listen to your inner voice. While she diminished you, you chose to find your worth from within. When he wanted to control you, you realized what freedom is. In all that emotional chaos, something else sprouted in you. Independence, depth, resilience. Sometimes the person who hurt you the most is the test that makes you grow the most. Your mother may have wounded you, yes, but that wound transformed you into a completely different woman. That's why your strength is not fake. That's why it is rooted. Now it is time to understand this pain, not just carry it. Because the 8 reasons I am about to tell you will reveal the psychological structure behind this relationship. Maybe it will shake you deeply, but sometimes the soul doesn't wake up without being shaken. Keep watching. Because this is not just about your mom, this is about who you are. First of all, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. You can also send the video to someone you love and support their spiritual growth. Send a powerful message to the universe by writing, "I choose my peace," in the comments. You will understand this better towards the end of the video. Now let's dive into the deep psychology of Carl Jung. 1. It forces you to face your shadow. Carl Jung once said, enlightenment comes not by creating light through imagination, but by making the darkness conscious. If a woman wants to access her inner power, she must first confront her own darkness. A toxic mother is the first person who makes this confrontation inevitable. Because as your mother suppresses you, criticizes you, ignores you, a shadow forms inside you that consumes you, but at the same time awakens you. And at some point you have to come eye to eye with this shadow. This shadow could be your repressed anger. It could be your fear of not being loved. It could be your obsession with always trying to be enough. Maybe you have been told since childhood that you are too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too smart, and for years you tried to minimize those too many. But one day, those repressed parts come back, and it shakes you. Most strong women pull themselves out of this shadow. Because her mother constantly criticized her, she stops looking for her worth outside and finds it inside. Because her mother belittled her, she learns to grow herself. Because that criticism over time either destroys a woman or turns her into fire. Let's say your mother always compared you to others. Your cousin is more successful. You should be more like your sister. These words gnawed at you for years. But at some point you stopped comparing yourself to others and chose to just be yourself. At that moment you became the woman born from the shadow. Because a toxic mother can tear you apart, but she can also reveal the real you hidden in those pieces. It hurts to stay in the shadow, yes. But when you face that shadow, no one can scare you with the darkness anymore. And maybe that's why strong women come out of toxic mothers, because they learn very early that there is no such thing as light until they meet the shadow. 2. Forces you to set your limits. Carl Jung once said, if you don't recognize your own shadow, the shadows of others will control you. A toxic mother does not teach you to set your own boundaries, so you have to learn to set your own boundaries. Toxic mothers most of the time emotionally push you out of your boundaries and constantly expect you to exist in a space that is not yours. They are constantly overly possessive of you, controlling your decisions and shaping you according to their wishes. This is difficult to recognize because in the beginning this control is called love. But over time you learn the difference between love and control. Your mother's constant interference in making you dependent on her is actually a process that forces you to learn to protect yourself. A toxic mother actually forces you to set boundaries at some point because unless she respects you, you don't know how to respect others. Many strong women grow up learning to set their own boundaries against this controlling mother figure. A woman's strength is not measured by how much she loves or is loved, but by how much she can protect herself. Not letting others manipulate you can sometimes make even those you love uncomfortable. But when a woman starts to set boundaries, she finds her own identity and has her own power. For example, if a woman is constantly forced to live according to what her mother thinks, one day she realizes that she has to build a life according to her own wishes and not according to the wishes of others. This realization can sometimes be painful. Realizing that your mother loves you but that she is trying to control you out of that love can be an emotional explosion. But it also opens the door to freedom. This is why strong women sometimes have distant, sometimes cold relationships with their toxic mothers. Because being able to set their own boundaries is essential for them to lead a peaceful life. Many strong women have faced toxic boundaries for years on this journey and eventually redrew them. Setting your own limits is the beginning of true freedom. 3. Forces you to constantly prove yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The things that corrupt us most often reveal what is lacking in us." Toxic mothers constantly push you to prove yourself, sometimes even when they say, "I love you very much." They don't say it directly by saying you're not good enough, but with every failure, every flaw, every criticism, they pull you back one step further. You are in a constant effort to get your mother's approval, to find out if she really loves you. Every success doesn't honor you more, it becomes an opportunity to say you have to do better next time. Strong women grow up for years trying to prove themselves. Their achievements always leave them wanting more. Achieving goals is not to prove themselves to others, but to fulfill a deficiency within themselves. The mother's constant criticism and expectations put a woman in a race, but the competitor is often only herself. Growing up this way makes it difficult for a woman to deal with her lack of self-confidence. She always feels she has to do better, but no matter how successful she is, it will never fill the emptiness inside her. Because a mother who never accepts you as complete cannot make you at peace with yourself. You will always feel incomplete. Let's say your mother constantly belittles your achievements and always wants more. For example, you did very well in school, but your mother said, "Good, but you should also do this. You are lacking in this area." At first, this might motivate you, but over time, this kind of criticism will make you feel inadequate. What you call success is just getting closer to another goal. Strong women grow up always fighting against this inner lack. They eventually have to fulfill the accomplishments that their mothers never deemed sufficient. This constant proving makes them stronger and more resilient. But it also brings out the desire within them to be complete. And in the end, strong women one day realize that it is not success, but self-acceptance that brings true strength. Because no matter how successful they are, only they can fill that inner deficiency. 4. She constantly pushes herself to emotional independence. Carl Jung once said, "Without exploring one's own depths, one lives only on the surface and never finds one's true identity." A woman who grows up with a toxic mother faces a constant search for emotional independence. Because toxic mothers often set conditions even when they show love and care. This creates an inner void in the woman's emotional world, the deep need for love on the one hand, and the constant feeling that it is lacking on the other. But it is precisely these contrasts that force a woman to deepen spiritually. To become an emotionally independent woman, the first step is to let go of the emotional burdens of others. A toxic mother often makes a woman too emotionally dependent. The woman feels obliged to respond to her mother's emotional needs, and this constant responsibility weighs heavily on her. But it is this strain that begins a woman's journey of self-discovery. Because for a woman to find her inner strength, she must first realize how dependent she is on the outside world. In this journey of inner discovery, a woman may initially feel lonely. But over time, she learns to resist the mother's constant expectations, manipulations, and emotional pressures. The search for emotional independence pushes the woman towards her own spiritual depths. Seeking approval from others, meeting the emotional needs of others ceases to be the meaning of her existence. At this point, the woman gains emotional independence, and that independence brings her freedom. For example, if a woman has always felt inadequate by her mother, this woman's self-discovery begins by prioritizing her own emotional needs independently of the expectations of others. In this process, even if she feels inadequate at first, over time, this feeling of inadequacy gives way to real strength. Because for a woman to feel complete does not have to depend on the approval and expectations of others. It is a process of learning to be independent in her own emotional world. Although toxic mothers constantly push a woman emotionally, it is this pushing that allows her to meet her true self and exist in the world on her own terms. In this way, as strong women gain emotional independence, they begin to challenge not only their inner world, but also the outer world. Women who don't feel they have to constantly prove themselves to others, who don't grow in parallel with the emotional needs of others, become strong, free individuals in the outside world as well. 5. Continuous inner journey to find their own identity. Carl Jung once said, "On the journey of self-discovery, one must most of all face one's own shadow." Women who grow up with a toxic mother often try to recognize themselves through the identities of others. The mother's constant expectations, criticism, and lack of love prevent the woman from discovering her identity in the right way. Because by projecting her own shortcomings and disappointments onto her child, the mother prevents her daughter from the journey of finding her own identity. When a woman grows up in the shadow of her mother, she always expects her true identity from the outside. But in time, she realizes that she has to face that shadow. Before becoming a strong individual, a woman has to come to terms with all those shadows. She embarks on an inner journey. At some point, her mother's expectations, love, and fears cease to be a reflection of her and turn into a search for an identity lost within her. This is both a frightening and liberating experience. Because in order for a woman to find her own identity, she often has to untie all those inner knots first. For example, if a woman is constantly forced by her mother to be the good girl, this can be the biggest obstacle in her journey to find her true self. Because constantly being the good girl causes a woman to give up her own desires and identity. Every effort to be the good girl creates a void deep inside her. But it is this emptiness that gives her the chance to discover her own identity. When a woman breaks out of her good or bad patterns and starts to reach her true self, that's when she becomes liberated. 6. Develops emotional intelligence. Women with a toxic mother grow up in a world where they are constantly exposed to the emotional demands of others. When they feel maternal emotional neglect or over-involvement, women learn to read emotional signals from the outside world much more keenly. In a sense, a woman who grows up in the shadow of her mother's toxic behavior has the opportunity to develop her emotional intelligence. A woman who grows up with a toxic mother is constantly confronted with emotional knots. She can be emotionally manipulative, overly demanding, or damage her inner world with emotional coldness. However, these experiences develop her emotional intelligence, because these constant emotional challenges teach her profound lessons in both empathy and emotional management. As she observes the emotional ups and downs of her toxic mother, she begins to better understand the emotional states of others. In response to her mother's constant criticism or indifference, she becomes more aware of the emotional needs of others. This leads to an increased capacity for empathy. At the same time, the woman matures emotionally and learns to control her own emotions. For example, a woman who grows up amidst her mother's constant criticism and coldness learns to make peace with her own emotions instead of suppressing them. By becoming emotionally aware, she becomes sensitive to the emotional needs of others. This lays the foundation for her to build strong and healthy relationships, because the woman tries to understand the emotional states of others and maintain emotional balance when necessary. 7. Forces spiritual growth. A woman with a toxic mother is constantly confronted with emotional devastation, trauma, and doubts. These pressures from the mother can create deep wounds in her psyche and force her to grow spiritually. However, hidden within these traumas is the potential for growth. The constant interventions of a toxic mother push the woman to a profound change, not only externally but also internally. Difficulties become an opportunity for spiritual transformation for the woman. Her mother's toxic behavior makes her aware of hidden wounds in her inner world, and this process forces her to heal, discover herself, and grow spiritually. In a woman's life, growing up with her mother's toxic influences often introduces feelings of unworthiness, inadequacy, and disconnection from reality. However, all this negativity at some point allows her to recognize herself on a deeper level. As she accepts the darker aspects of herself, she learns to make peace with these darker aspects, and a process of spiritual maturation begins. Growing up under constant criticism from her mother, a woman may initially feel incomplete and inadequate. However, after a while, she realizes that these shortcomings are an opportunity for her to discover her hidden strength. She begins to realize that every negative thing her mother says and does offers her a chance to transform herself and grow spiritually. Rather than feeling like a victim, she chooses to learn from these experiences and transform them into her own healing journey. For example, her mother's attitudes that constantly made her feel inadequate can be an opportunity to discover her true worth. The constant search for validation from her mother pushes her to an internal process of self-acceptance. This process allows her to rebuild her self-esteem and self-worth. The emotional emptiness created by a toxic mother leads a woman to recognize the spiritual voids within herself and to fill them with her own inner resources. With the independence a woman develops from her mother's manipulations, she begins her own spiritual evolution. This evolution takes place not only by freeing herself from her mother's oppression, but also by overcoming her own deep-seated fears and doubts and building a stronger and more authentic self. In confronting her mother's toxic influences, the woman actually confronts her own darker sides and experiences great spiritual growth in the process. This growth begins with defining her personal boundaries. A toxic mother constantly pushes the woman to prove herself and seek approval. However, at some point, she abandons this search for approval and becomes self-sufficient. This lays the foundation for the woman to form her individual identity. As the influence of her mother's manipulations diminishes, she values her own inner truths more and more. As a result, toxic mothers force strong women to grow spiritually. Each challenge accelerates her inner evolution. By confronting her darker aspects, she learns to accept herself and eventually achieves inner freedom. Although her mother's toxic behavior may initially frustrate her, these experiences eventually lead to spiritual awakening and growth. Having a toxic family is often seen as a great pain and a great destruction. But stop and think for a moment. Perhaps without that toxic family, you would not be who you are today. Ask yourself this question. Would you have the strength you have today if you had not had those painful experiences? Maybe that toxic relationship was the most important teacher of your spiritual journey. Maybe that family was designed to make you the strong person you are today. Challenges are always the things that shape our lives, that challenge us. But these challenges are there to make us strong. The things in your life right now that challenge you, that wear you down, are perhaps your deepest teachers. Carl Jung once said, "Accepting your own inner shadow is the first step towards a spiritual awakening." What we call the shadow is the darkest, most fragile parts of ourselves. And maybe that toxic family forced you to face that shadow, because when everything is going well, nobody wants to see their dark side. That dark side is how you really get to know yourself. Growing up in a toxic family forces you to face your shadow, and that confrontation makes you stronger. Every obstacle in life takes you one step further. This is exactly what Stoicism teaches us. The Stoics say that we need to distinguish what is in our control in life and what is not. The only things we can control are our inner attitudes. External events and the people around us can disturb us and cause us pain, but what matters is how we react to them. Growing up in a toxic family makes us more careful and stronger in our reactions. Because we learn to manage with our minds and hearts what we cannot control. A toxic parent slowly molds your character, and one day you realize that the pain has made you much more mature and stronger. Yes, toxic families can break us, they can wear us down, but they can also make us stronger. Because that destruction is actually a process that brings out the true strength in us. Maybe every moment you feel emotionally devastated has actually reborn you. This is exactly what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The suffering that shapes us also helps us find our inner light." Challenging circumstances bring out the hidden strengths within you, but perhaps this is where we find the deepest meaning. If everything was easy, maybe you wouldn't be the strong, determined, confident person you are today. Growing up with challenges constantly gives you new perspectives. Every trauma, every challenge teaches you to see things from different perspectives. The pressures in that toxic family can sometimes shake you spiritually, but they also give you a deeper understanding of life. This is exactly what the philosophy of Stoicism teaches us. Life can be challenging, but we can respond powerfully to challenging circumstances. If you liked this video, don't forget to comment and subscribe to our channel. Also send it to someone you love and help us get this video to as many women as possible. See you in our next video.